A 14-year-old walked back into a living room in Riverview, Florida, and opened fire on the two people sitting there. One would die trying to save the other. But the identity of this teenage gunman would shatter every assumption about family violence. What you're about to hear is not fiction. This is the true story of September 16th, 2023, a day that started with the mundane comfort of afternoon television and ended with a mother lying dead on her own living room floor, killed by the child she had brought into this world 14 years earlier. The Harris household on Linmore Drive sat nestled in the Summerfield subdivision, a residential area where families raised children and neighbors knew each other's names. On this particular Saturday afternoon, 39-year-old Tiffany Harris was doing what millions of Americans do on weekends, relaxing in front of the television with someone she cared about. Beside her sat Cortevious Cruz, her boyfriend of approximately 1 month. Their relationship was still new, still in that stage where every moment together felt significant. For Tiffany, a mother of 3 who had faced her share of life's challenges, this relationship represented hope. Cruz had seen past her struggles and found something worth loving. The afternoon programming flickered across the screen as they settled into the comfortable rhythm of shared leisure time. There was nothing remarkable about this moment. No arguments, no tension, no indication that within minutes, this peaceful scene would explode into violence that would claim Tiffany's life. Also in the home was Tiffany's 14-year-old son, Adeem Berry. Like many teenagers, he moved in and out of family spaces with the casual indifference of youth. The living room held 3 people, connected by blood and affection, unaware that they were living through their final moments of normalcy. According to witness statements and evidence later presented in court, what happened next occurred with shocking suddenness. Adeem had been present during the television session, part of the family tableau that defined countless American afternoons. But, at some point, he left the room. Neither Tiffany nor Cruz thought anything of this departure. Teenage boys leave rooms constantly, for snacks, for bathroom breaks, for the simple restlessness that comes with adolescence. There was no reason to suspect that when Adeem Berry walked out of that living room, he was about to cross a line that could never be uncrossed. The minutes ticked by. The television continued its programming. Tiffany and Cruz remained absorbed in their afternoon together, 2 adults finding comfort in each other's company. The house around them held the typical sounds of domestic life, the hum of appliances, the distant noise of neighbors, the ordinary soundtrack of a residential Saturday. Then Adeem returned. But he wasn't empty-handed. In his possession was a firearm, a weapon that had no business being in the hands of a 14-year-old. Yet there it was, cold steel that would forever alter the trajectory of multiple lives. The sight of her son holding a gun must have triggered every maternal instinct Tiffany possessed, but she had no time to process what she was seeing. Without warning, without preamble, without the extended confrontation that might characterize adult conflicts, Adeem Berry opened fire. The bullets found their targets with devastating effectiveness. Cortevious Cruz, who had been enjoying a relaxed afternoon with his girlfriend, suddenly found himself fighting for his life as projectiles tore through his body. The attack was swift, brutal, and completely unexpected. But Tiffany Harris, in what would become the defining moment of her life, didn't freeze. She didn't run. She didn't try to save herself. Instead, she did what mothers do. She tried to protect someone she loved. Cruz would later recall how Tiffany immediately threw herself into the situation, attempting to gain control of the weapon that was being used to destroy her family. Her intervention was instinctive, born from the same protective impulses that had guided her through years of motherhood. In those crucial seconds, she wasn't thinking about her own safety. She was thinking about stopping the violence that was tearing through her living room. The struggle for the firearm became a battle for survival, with Tiffany desperately trying to disarm her own son, while Cruz dealt with the immediate trauma of his wounds. The scene that had been peaceful moments earlier now resembled a war zone, with gunfire echoing through a residential neighborhood where such sounds should never be heard. But Tiffany's heroic intervention came at the ultimate price, In the struggle to control the weapon, she sustained fatal injuries. The bullets that ended her life were fired by the same child she had carried for 9 months, raised for 14 years, and loved unconditionally despite whatever challenges he had presented. The irony was as devastating as it was absolute. A mother killed by the son she was trying to save from himself. Cortevius Cruz, meanwhile, had been struck multiple times. Bullets had found his hands, his shoulder, his jaw, and his leg. The injuries were severe, life-threatening, and would require immediate medical attention if he had any hope of survival. But even as his own blood flowed, even as his body screamed in pain, he would later remember Tiffany's final act not as futile, but as heroic. The gunfire stopped, but the crisis was far from over. Cruz, despite his multiple wounds, managed to escape the immediate area. His survival instincts, combined with whatever adrenaline his traumatized body could produce, allowed him to get away from the ongoing threat that Adim Berry represented. Every step must have been agony, every movement a testament to human resilience. But he kept moving, because staying meant certain death. Meanwhile, Tiffany Harris lay motionless on the floor of her own home. Her life ended by the very person she had brought into the world and loved without reservation. Her final act had been one of protection, of maternal sacrifice, of the kind of selfless love that defines the best of human nature. But it hadn't been enough to save her. The immediate aftermath of the shooting transformed the Harris household from a place of family life into a crime scene. The comfortable living room where a mother and her boyfriend had been watching television now bore the unmistakable evidence of violence: blood, shell casings, and the terrible silence that follows gunfire. Neighbors in the Summerfield subdivision heard the shots. In a residential area where the loudest sounds typically came from lawnmowers and children playing, the distinctive crack of gunfire cut through the afternoon air like a blade. Those who heard it knew immediately that something terrible had happened, though none could have imagined the full scope of the tragedy. Some neighbors called 911. Others peered cautiously from windows, trying to understand what had shattered the peace of their Saturday afternoon. The sound of approaching sirens would soon fill the air. But for now, in these immediate moments after the shooting, the neighborhood held its breath. Before we continue with what happened next, I want to hear from you, our True Crime Case Tapes community. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from today. Are you seeing cases like this more frequently in your area? And here's something that really haunts me about this case. If you witnessed a family member attacking someone you loved, do you think you'd have the courage to intervene like Tiffany did? Hit that like button if this story is already affecting you the way it affected me when I first learned about it. The story of September 16, 2023 was just beginning. The shots had been fired, a mother lay dead, a man fought for his life, and somewhere in the aftermath, a 14-year-old boy would have to face the consequences of the most devastating decision of his young life. The first 911 call reached Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office at 4:17 p.m. Multiple callers reported hearing gunshots in the Summerfield subdivision, with some witnesses describing seeing a young person running down Linmore Drive carrying what appeared to be a firearm. Deputy units were dispatched immediately, their response time clocked at under 6 minutes from the initial call. When the first patrol car turned onto Linmore Drive, officers encountered a scene that would challenge even their most experienced crisis management protocols. Running down the residential street was Adim Berry, still armed, still dangerous, and in a state of psychological distress that made him unpredictable to everyone around him. The sight of a 14-year-old carrying a firearm in broad daylight sent the responding officers into high alert mode, but their training dictated caution rather than immediate confrontation. Deputy Tracy activated his body camera as he exited his patrol vehicle. The footage that would be captured over the next 16 minutes would become the cornerstone of the prosecution's case, providing an unfiltered documentary record of how law enforcement handled an armed juvenile suspect in crisis. The pursuit was not a high-speed chase through traffic, but rather a tense foot pursuit through a residential neighborhood where any misstep could result in injury to civilians, officers, or the suspect himself. Barry's movements were erratic, his behavior suggesting someone operating under extreme psychological pressure. Additional units arrived within minutes, establishing a perimeter around the area where Barry had been spotted. The tactical approach required delicate balance, containing an armed suspect while recognizing that they were dealing with a minor who was clearly in distress. The standoff began when Barry, cornered near a cluster of houses approximately 3 blocks from his home, turned to face the officers who had been pursuing him. What happened next was captured in devastating detail by multiple body cameras, creating a permanent record of 16 minutes that would haunt everyone who witnessed them. Barry raised the firearm, not toward the officers, but toward his own head. The sight of a 14-year-old holding a gun to his own temple transformed the situation from a criminal pursuit into a suicide intervention. Officers immediately shifted their approach, recognizing that aggressive tactics could easily result in the boy taking his own life right in front of them. Deputy Johnson, a crisis negotiator with 7 years of experience, took the lead in establishing communication. The body camera footage shows him slowly advancing while speaking in measured tones, his voice steady despite the intensity of the situation. "Adim, I need you to put the gun down," Johnson's voice can be heard saying. "Nobody wants to hurt you. We just want to talk." The teenager's response was barely audible, but the audio enhancement later performed by forensic technicians captured fragments of his words. He spoke about being tired and sorry, though the full context of his statements would require extensive analysis to understand. For several minutes, Barry alternated between pointing the weapon at his own head and lowering it slightly, creating a pattern of behavior that kept officers on edge. Each time he raised the gun, multiple officers adjusted their positions, ready to respond if the situation escalated further. The negotiation process required extraordinary patience. Officers could not rush toward an armed suspect, but they also could not allow him to harm himself while they watched. The balance between these competing demands played out in real time, with every second recorded by the unforgiving eye of body camera technology. At the 12-minute mark of the standoff, Barry began showing signs of physical exhaustion. The adrenaline that had carried him through the initial crisis was beginning to fade, and officers noticed his movements becoming less coordinated. This presented both an opportunity and a new danger. A tired suspect might be more likely to surrender, but also more likely to make a fatal mistake. Deputy Rodriguez, positioned approximately 30 feet away, had been slowly closing the distance throughout the negotiation. His approach was so gradual that Barry seemed unaware of how much closer the officer had moved, a tactical advantage that would prove crucial in the final moments of the standoff. The breakthrough came when Barry's attention was momentarily diverted by a helicopter that had arrived to provide aerial support. In that split second of distraction, when the gun was pointed neither at himself nor at officers, Rodriguez made his move. The takedown was swift and professional. Rodriguez covered the distance between his position and Barry in less than 3 seconds, using techniques designed to minimize injury to both the suspect and the officer. The firearm was secured immediately, ending the immediate threat that had held an entire neighborhood in suspense. Barry offered no resistance once the weapon was removed from his possession. The body camera footage shows him collapsing to the ground, his energy completely depleted by the emotional and physical trauma of the previous hour. Officers immediately called for medical personnel to assess his condition, following protocols for dealing with suspects who might be experiencing psychological crisis. While Barry was being secured and evaluated, other officers were establishing the crime scene back at the Harris residence. The house had been cordoned off, with investigators beginning the methodical process of documenting evidence that would be crucial to understanding exactly what had transpired. Crime scene technicians arrived within an hour of the initial shooting, beginning their systematic examination of every room where violence had occurred. The living room received particular attention, with photographers documenting the positions where victims had fallen, the trajectory of bullets, and any physical evidence that might help reconstruct the sequence of events. The firearm used in the attack had been secured during Barry's arrest, but investigators needed to establish a clear chain of custody and begin forensic analysis immediately. The weapon was photographed in place, then carefully bagged and tagged for transport to the county forensics laboratory. Gunshot residue testing became a priority for investigators. Samples were taken from Barry's hands and clothing, though the delay between the shooting and his arrest meant that some evidence might have been compromised. Additional residue testing was performed on surfaces throughout the house, helping investigators map the movement of the weapon during the attack. Forensic specialists also collected evidence from the victims. Cruz, who had been transported to Tampa General Hospital for emergency surgery, provided samples that would help investigators understand the type of ammunition used and the range from which shots were fired. His injuries, while severe, would provide crucial evidence about the nature of the attack. The medical examiner's preliminary examination of Tiffany Harris's body revealed entry wounds consistent with close-range shooting, supporting witness statements about her attempt to intervene. The angle and location of her injuries would later help prosecutors establish the sequence of events during the struggle for the weapon. Investigators conducted extensive interviews with neighbors who had heard the gunshots. Mrs. Patterson, who lived 2 houses down, provided a detailed timeline of when she first heard sounds of distress coming from the Harris home. Her account helped establish the duration of the attack and the timeline for Barry's flight from the scene. Other neighbors contributed observations about Barry's behavior immediately after the shooting. Several witnesses described seeing him running down the street, weapon in hand, but none reported any threatening behavior toward civilians during his flight. This information would become relevant to understanding his state of mind and potential charges. The forensic analysis extended beyond the immediate crime scene. Investigators examined Barry's bedroom, looking for any evidence that might suggest premeditation or provide insight into his motivations. His computer and phone were seized for digital forensic analysis, though initial examinations revealed no evidence of planning or research related to the attack. Blood spatter analysis provided additional evidence about the positions of all parties during the shooting. The patterns found throughout the living room helped investigators understand the movement and struggle that had taken place, confirming witness statements about Tiffany's intervention. Now I want to hear your thoughts on this investigation process. Comment below. Do you think body cameras are making a real difference in how these cases are handled? And here's what really gets me about this case. How do you balance the need to apprehend a dangerous suspect with the recognition that you're dealing with a child in crisis? Subscribe if you want to see more deep dives into how these investigations really work, because the next part of this story shows just how solid police work builds an airtight case. The evidence collected during this phase of the investigation would prove overwhelming. Every piece, from the body camera footage to the forensic analysis, painted a clear picture of what had happened on Linmore Drive. But having evidence and securing a conviction are two different things, especially when the defendant is a 14-year-old facing charges that could impact the rest of his life. The Hillsborough County State Attorney's Office faced a decision that would define how the justice system responds to juvenile violence in Florida. On September 20th, 2023, just 4 days after the shooting, prosecutors filed formal charges against Adeem Barry that would shock the legal community. Second-degree murder with a weapon. First-degree premeditated attempted murder. Aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. These weren't the typical charges filed against a 14-year-old. In Florida, juveniles are usually processed through family court, where rehabilitation takes precedence over punishment. But the severity of Barry's actions pushed his case into adult criminal court, a decision that sparked immediate controversy among legal experts and child advocacy groups. State Attorney Rebecca Hayes announced the charges during a press conference that drew regional media attention. While we recognize the defendant's age, Hayes stated, the deliberate nature of these crimes and their devastating impact on the victims and community require the full application of adult criminal law. The decision to charge Barry as an adult triggered Florida's mandatory transfer provisions, which automatically moves certain serious felonies involving minors into adult court. Defense attorneys immediately signaled their intention to challenge this classification, setting up a legal battle that would extend far beyond Barry's individual case. Public defender Angela Parker was appointed to represent Barry, bringing with her 23 years of experience in juvenile defense cases. Parker had successfully argued for juvenile court jurisdiction in several high-profile cases, but Barry's charges presented unique challenges that would test every aspect of her legal expertise. The defense team's first motion challenged the adult court jurisdiction, arguing that Barry's age and psychological state at the time of the offense made him unsuitable for adult prosecution. The 47-page filing detailed Barry's developmental history, previous interactions with social services, and expert testimony about adolescent brain development. Judge Patricia Williams presided over the jurisdictional hearing in November 2023. The courtroom was packed with legal observers, victim advocates, and members of both families as attorneys presented competing visions of how justice should be served. The hearing lasted 3 days, with testimony from child psychologists, legal experts, and character witnesses. Dr. Kevin Blake, a forensic psychologist specializing in juvenile offenders, testified for the defense about the cognitive differences between adolescent and adult decision-making. His testimony focused on impulse control, risk assessment, and the developing prefrontal cortex in teenage brains. The prosecution countered with their own expert, Dr. Amanda Foster, who emphasized the planning and deliberation evident in Barry's actions. Foster testified that while age was a factor, the nature of the crimes demonstrated a level of intent that warranted adult prosecution. Judge Williams ruled on December 8, 2023, that Barry would remain in adult court. Her decision cited the extraordinary circumstances of the case and the need for public safety considerations to outweigh traditional juvenile justice approaches. The ruling opened the door for a trial that would determine whether a 14-year-old could receive a life sentence in Florida. Jury selection began on February 12, 2025, presenting unique challenges for both sides. Prospective jurors were questioned extensively about their ability to apply adult criminal standards to a juvenile defendant. Many potential jurors expressed discomfort with the concept, leading to a selection process that took nearly 2 weeks. The final jury consisted of 7 women and 5 men, ranging in age from 28 to 67. 3 jurors had children of their own, while 4 had experience in education or social services. The demographic composition would prove significant, as both sides crafted arguments designed to appeal to different perspectives on childhood, responsibility, and justice. Prosecutor David Harris opened the trial with a statement that emphasized the victims rather than the defendant's age. Tiffany Harris died trying to save someone she loved. Harris told the jury, "Cortevius Cruz bears permanent scars from an attack that nearly killed him. The defendant's age does not diminish the reality of their suffering." The prosecution's case relied heavily on the physical evidence and witness testimony established during the investigation. But their strategy went beyond simply proving what happened. They needed to demonstrate that Barry's actions met the legal standards for premeditation and intent required for the charges filed. Harris presented a timeline showing Barry's movements before and after the shooting, arguing that his decision to retrieve the weapon and return to the living room demonstrated deliberation. The prosecution characterized the attack as a planned decision rather than an impulsive act of violence. Defense attorney Parker presented a fundamentally different narrative. Her opening statement focused on Barry's psychological state, family dynamics, and the cognitive limitations that affected his decision-making. Parker argued that while the shooting was tragic, it did not meet the legal threshold for adult criminal responsibility. The defense strategy centered on diminished capacity rather than denying the facts of the case. Parker brought in experts who testified about trauma, family dysfunction, and the impact of untreated psychological issues on adolescent behavior. The goal was not to excuse Barry's actions, but to provide context that might lead to conviction on lesser charges. Trial testimony lasted 8 days, with 23 witnesses called by both sides. The prosecution focused on the impact testimony from Cortevius Cruz, who detailed his ongoing physical therapy and psychological trauma. His appearance in court, still bearing visible scars from the attack, provided powerful evidence of the crime's lasting impact. The defense called Berry's teachers, social workers, and family members who testified about his struggles in the months leading up to the shooting. Their testimony painted a picture of a troubled teenager who had not received adequate support for escalating behavioral issues. Dr. Lisa Anderson, a child psychiatrist, provided the most compelling defense testimony. Anderson had evaluated Berry extensively after his arrest and testified about the complex interaction between adolescent brain development and trauma exposure. Her testimony suggested that Berry's capacity for adult-level decision-making was significantly compromised. The prosecution's rebuttal focused on the deliberate nature of Berry's actions and the need for accountability, regardless of age. They argued that accepting the defense's position would essentially create immunity for juvenile offenders who commit serious crimes. Jury deliberations began on March 3, 2025, and lasted 4 days. The length of deliberation suggested significant disagreement among jurors about how to balance Berry's age against the severity of his crimes. Court observers reported that several jurors appeared emotional during the proceedings. The verdict, announced on March 7, 2025, found Berry guilty on all counts. The jury foreman later stated that while they struggled with the defendant's age, the evidence of premeditation and the impact on victims ultimately guided their decision. Several jurors were visibly emotional as the verdict was read. Sentencing proceedings began immediately, with both sides presenting evidence about appropriate punishment. The prosecution sought the maximum sentence allowable under Florida law, while the defense argued for the minimum term with provisions for rehabilitation and eventual release. Judge Williams faced the extraordinary challenge of sentencing a minor to what could effectively be a life term. Her final sentence, delivered on March 15, 2025, reflected the competing demands of punishment and the possibility of redemption. Berry received 40 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years, contingent on successful completion of psychological treatment programs. The sentence satisfied neither side completely. Victim advocates felt it was too lenient given the severity of the crimes, while juvenile justice advocates argued that any adult sentence for a 14-year-old violated principles of developmental justice. The case has since become a landmark in Florida juvenile justice law, cited in legal briefs and academic papers examining the intersection of age, culpability, and public safety. Law schools now use Berry's case to teach students about the complexities of trying juveniles as adults. Before we wrap up this case, I want to hear your final thoughts. Do you think our justice system is equipped to handle cases where children commit adult crimes? Should age ever be a complete defense? Or are there some acts so serious that age becomes irrelevant? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Hit that subscribe button for more deep dives into how our legal system really works. And share this video if you think others need to understand how complex these cases really are. The Harris family continues to advocate for better support systems that might prevent future tragedies, while the legal precedent set by Berry's case continues shaping how courts across Florida handle similar situations.